As everyone expected, Alabama rolls over Missouri, 38-19, and the last 6 points Missouri scored only counted because Eli Drinkwitz called 3 timeouts in the last minute of the game during garbage time. We can argue all day of whether or not that was a cheap move or not. I think it was. You're playing a dangerous game. Injuries can happen. I know he's just trying to get reps for his players, but you just quit. You're down 25 points. Yeah, 25 points. You're down 25. Just quit. Don't try to score another touchdown. But anyway, that goes without saying. It was a blowout by Alabama. The score doesn't quite indicate how much of a blowout it could have been. It was 28-3 at halftime. Obviously, it could have been 56-6 if Alabama kept the starters in and kept their foot on the pedal. But it was a fun game. It was really good to see Alabama back on the field again. Alabama went 4 of 6 scoring touchdowns in the first half, 4 of 6 drives. They had to punt twice, scored 4 touchdowns. And I think Alabama looked pretty darn good. I think the defense is looking better. You got some bad dudes on the defense, which is something that you really kind of didn't feel last year. Obviously, you had Terrell Lewis and Raekwon, but you got some bad. That is a bad defense, and I'm excited about it. 19 points doesn't really do it justice for how good the defense was. They did a good job. They got stops. I know it's just Missouri, and I know Missouri's probably really bad, and I know Missouri's probably even more bad since they've had the COVID stuff and had a shortened fall season and no spring season, but I think Alabama looked pretty good. The offense was flawless. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Shavers, Mac Jones, Najee Harris. This is going to be a good offense. I don't think we're going to lose much ground from losing Tua and Judy and Henry Ruggs. So I'm excited about this season. I hate that it's going to be a weird asterisk season. We don't even know if we're going to have a college football playoff, so I'm just taking it one game at a time. But I hope we can be crowned number 1 at the end of this really weird season. Other than that, it was a pretty boring game. There's not much to talk about. It was a routine season opening blowout for Alabama, but it was really good to see an SEC football game. So moving on to the other SEC and top 25 football games around the country, you had Oklahoma, the number 3 team in the country, losing to Kansas State. And that was a pretty bad loss for Oklahoma. Oklahoma was up 35-14 in the third quarter, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, that's correct. They're up 35-14, and they end up losing 38-35. That was just – it's something that Oklahoma has got accustomed to doing every single season. You had that loss to Kansas State last year. You had the loss in 2018 to Texas. You had the loss in 2017 to Iowa State. And it's something that just keeps happening for Oklahoma. And I don't expect Oklahoma to be bad this year. I'm thinking they might take another loss, but it's very possible they'll be 9-1 and they'll win the Big 12. So we don't really know. It was an ugly game. And speaking about ugly games, we go over to the defending champions, LSU, who took a loss to Mississippi State. And that game was pretty surprising, but once you watch the first half, I don't think anybody would be surprised that Mississippi State won that game. Once you watch that first half, you kind of realize that, man, this LSU team, especially without Derek Stingley, this LSU team is just not as good as they were last year. They lost 16 or 17 of their starters from last season, and this team's going to have some struggles. This LSU team might end up 6-4. They might end up 7-3, but they're not going to be much better than that. I think this is more LSU not being as good than it is Mississippi State being good. I think Mississippi State is a top 25 team. They will definitely be in the top 25 this week, but I just don't think that Mississippi State was the good team here. I think LSU was the bad team here. You had a lot of – the offense for LSU just wasn't great. You had 2 gifts to to give them 10 points. And then you had a pick six, which gave them another 7 points. So that was 17 points that were gifted from Mississippi State via turnovers. But speaking about Mississippi State, KJ Costello, he had 623 passing yards, and everybody's kind of getting hyped up about that. And this is another reason why I'm saying Mississippi State isn't as good as I think this is why I'm saying Mississippi State is overhyped. It's because KJ Costello had 623 passing yards, but he threw the ball 60 times. That's what happens when you play for Mike Leach. You throw the ball 60 times, and you get like 1,000,000 passing yards. KJ Costello also threw for 2 interceptions and had 2 turnovers. You can't do that. You can't turn the ball over 4 times and expect to win many games. And I know some of them were lucky turnovers that LSU got, but you just can't do it. He threw a pick six, he threw another interception, and he had 2 fumbles back-to-back. You can't let teams come back in a game like that. So I think KJ Costello is a little overhyped. He's still a good player. He's still probably better than he was last year. But I just don't think Mississippi State's going to be as good as everybody thinks. I'm expecting them to be a top 15 team. I'm expecting them to go, 7-3, 6-4. They'll be good, but they're just not going to be as good as the team that beat the defending champions normally would be. This LSU team's going to look a lot like that Auburn 2011 team when you lost Cam Newton and lost a bunch of starters. I think that's going to be the exact same thing for LSU. But we'll see. We got a long, weird season ahead. We don't know what's going to happen. So if this were a normal year, I'd be saying, yeah, LSU not going to be anywhere near as not anywhere even close to as good as they were last year. But we don't know because this is going to be such a weird season. So moving on from LSU, Mississippi State, we had another weird game between Georgia and Arkansas, and Georgia looked absolutely terrible in the first half of the game. They came back and they won 37-10, and the final score makes it look like a normal game, but man, Georgia played really, really bad in that first half. Only a field goal from the offense, and that came in the last seconds of the second quarter. So really, Georgia didn't score the entire first half. I think they found their starter without JT Daniels for the time being. It's Stetson Bennett. But Georgia looked really bad. I don't think that's going to hurt them too much. I think they just had a sluggish start. I think they'll be okay. But, man, that was an ugly first half to be down 2 points to Arkansas at the halftime. That was ugly. So, moving on, Florida, Ole Miss. Both of those teams, Florida and Ole Miss, do not know how to play defense. They do not know how to play defense. 51-35, that's pretty bad. Ole Miss let Florida score 51 points, and Florida let freaking Ole Miss score 35 points. Now, it might mean that Lane Kiffin's got a good offensive scheming, but if you're Florida and you want to be a contender, you can't be letting people score 35 points on you. That's all I got to say. Kentucky and Auburn, that game was close for the first 3 quarters. Kentucky kind of got robbed of a touchdown at the end of the second half. Maybe not, depending on. It looked like a touchdown to me on the 1-yard line. Then they threw the pick six that got taken back because of the targeting call. But Auburn definitely deserved to win that game. They won by 16, but I think it was a little closer than the score would indicate, especially because of that 2-point conversion. It would have been a 14-point game without it. Auburn, they don't look that impressive to me, and I know I'm an Alabama fan saying this, but Auburn, it feels like a typical Auburn team. It's not any different than Auburn normally is. To be beating Kentucky 29-13, that feels like typical Auburn. So not much changing from the Plains. And we also had Texas A&M beating Vanderbilt by 5, 17-12. And Jimbo Fisher's going to have to coach them up before they play Alabama in Tuscaloosa, because if you play the way you play when you beat Vanderbilt by 5, that is not going to beat Alabama by any stretch of the imagination.